Engaging Networks is a digital technology platform that offers clients everything they need to successfully raise more money and win more campaigns. The Engaging Networks platform includes online fundraising, including peer-to-peer fundraising, email marketing, including marketing automation, online advocacy, including click-to-call phone advocacy. Founded in 2000, we work with over 400 charities in 50 countries. If you would like to discover what's possible with the Engaging Networks platform, request a demo today.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Resource Alliance Global Community. My name is Rebecca Elcombe and I'm one of the directors here at the Resource Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us today, wherever you are in the world. Today's session is going to explore the complexities and ethical conundrums of using Facebook and other digital platforms for fundraising and engagement. We're joined by a stellar lineup of John Lloyd from the Mozilla Foundation, Nandini Jammy of Sleeping Giants, Harriet Kingerby of Conscious Advertising Network, and Matt Darby of M&R. We hope you enjoyed today's session. Please do stick around at the end for the Q&A, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Hi everyone, my name is John and I'm from Mozilla, and I'm here to talk about the ethics of using Facebook for nonprofits. I've got a great panel here with us today, and we're going to have a discussion examining some of the complexities and the ethical conundrums of using digital platforms like Facebook to aid nonprofits in campaigning or organizing and fundraising efforts. So joining me today, I've got Nandini Jammy. She's a co-founder of Check My Ads, which is a brand safety consultancy, and she was a previous co-founder of Sleeping Giants. I also have Harriet Kingerby, who's the co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network, which is an ethical ad coalition, and is also a Mozilla Fellow with Consumers International. And last but not least, I've got Matt Darby from M&R, which is an agency that works exclusively with nonprofits on campaigning and fundraising. So I'll just jump straight into it. And Harriet, what's going on? What's the problem here?
Thanks, John. Well, we've got Facebook is an organization with a lot of governance issues, I think you can safely say. So its own civil rights audit found that its decisions contributed to a setback in civil rights and may compromise the upcoming US election. We've got, something came out yesterday which showed that they're still using, allowing advertisers to advertise against protected categories like age and race when you're considering employment and housing. Posts on the platforms are implemented in genocide in Myanmar. And they're removing fact checks from climate denial. Like the news is coming thick and fast. And at the same time, it's making kind of millions of dollars in advertising revenue. And the recent Stop Hate for Profit campaign have shown that actually advertisers and including nonprofits, but also including corporate entities, are starting to get really uncomfortable with the way things are running. I think though, when we're talking about this issue of kind of what's happening with media spend, we do need to think beyond Facebook. For example, if advertisers, nonprofits or otherwise, are engaging with any form of kind of programmatic advertising, then it's likely that some of that spend is going to fund hate speech and misinformation. The Global Disinformation Index think that at least $235 million in revenue is generated annually from ads running on extremist and disinformation websites, and we know that does things like kind of derailing elections, kind of causing the kind of civil unrest that we've seen. And then we've also got the problem of keyword blocking, which is demonetizing content from LGBTQ publications, from hard news, etc. So we've got a little bit of a problem here.
Yeah, and it's not just a problem with Facebook by the sounds of it. And I'll hand it over to Dini now, because your work with Sleeping Giants actually leveraged a lot of social media networks like Facebook and Twitter. And those same networks have been found to actively promote hate speech and misinformation. So maybe you can talk us through a little bit about the origins of that work, and was the fact that some of the mobilization platforms that you were using something that you considered when you started out with that campaign?
Yeah, happy to give you a quick overview of how we started. So my background is in marketing. I'm a tech tech marketer, and I visited Breitbart.com, a website I'd been hearing about throughout the elections, after the elections, to check it out. And the first thing I noticed was that the site was plastered in ads from some of the biggest companies in the world. And if you're in marketing, or even if you're not in marketing, you probably know that that when an ad appears on a website, that's how that website is being monetized. So if they were, if they were bringing the kind of traffic that they were, with 17 million visitors coming to the website at their peak, they were able to monetize all that traffic using ad dollars from unsuspecting advertisers, because of course those advertisers are not manually placing those ads on that site. It is being placed for them through Google, through Facebook Audience Network, and through at least a dozen other ad exchanges. So when we jumped into action, we did it on Twitter and Facebook. Those are the two, obviously the social media networks that everyone's using. Did we think about the irony of what we were doing? Oh yeah, but it's free and it's simple, and we ended up being able to create a lot of change and reach a lot of people, and particularly users, who were able to build our community through these networks. So it ended up being worth it, because we got to use the tools that are available to us to be able to create the change that we want.
Yeah, and Matt, that's one thing that other nonprofits have said as well. Like Amnesty International produced a report, and I'll just use my own words here, that they essentially said that using Facebook is a necessary evil, that it was part of the cost of being able to reach and mobilize their members and supporters. I worked for Mozilla, and we outright quit using Facebook altogether after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and that was our red line. But with that, we lost the ability to directly contact people who support us. So if you do ditch Facebook, what are some of the things that nonprofits can do to make sure that they can still reach their supporters?
Yeah, there are a few answers to that, right? Which all sort of have their own complications, even if they're all probably legitimate answers. I think this July we had organizations who were participating in the Stop Pay for Profit campaign, right, asked the same thing. And one of the obvious answers is that the platforms with the similar reach and performance, especially from a fundraising perspective, is Google/YouTube, right? But as we've already mentioned, you may not be really avoiding the problems you're concerned about by just switching one tech giant for another one. I think on the other extreme of the spectrum, right, I know organizations who have decided that they feel the need to abandon paid media altogether, right? And I think for that can be an option, in particular for anyone who can take advantage of other community benefits that they have. For instance, a large active volunteer base. Maybe you have a very strong earned media department. Maybe you have celebrity boosters who are willing to champion your cause for you, right? Those things have a very different ROI calculation than paid media, but they do accomplish the same sort of goals. I would say that I think I tend to find that people settle on something that's in between those two extremes, right? Just for some practical options, I think you can choose to run display ads rather than running them, through ad exchanges on any website. You can limit the websites that you show up to only be like trusted websites or news websites. You can stick to smaller community co-branded petitions at places like Care2 or Daily Kos, or two in the United States that we use. Or you can choose to use Google and Facebook, but you can draw a line about refusing to pass audience data through them or refusing to use their pixels. I think there's going to be a trade-off, no matter what you choose, between insight into what's working, the relative amount of staff time you need to run things, and what you get back. But I will say that one of the benefits of the digital everything age is that information platforms and access to those platforms are relatively democratized. There's not just 3 TV channels that you can only choose from. There are other options.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing you mentioned there was like advertising in other areas of the internet, not just social media ads. And Nandini, that's something that your work has really highlighted, especially recently, that it isn't just ads on social media that are contributing to this massive hate speech and misinformation problem. So, and you kind of mentioned earlier with Breitbart, but can you tell us a little bit more about like, what should nonprofits be looking for in terms of where their ads are being placed?
Yeah, so in 4 years of work, I have come across a lot of ad exchanges and ad tech companies, and I have found that not a single one of them appears to have a disinformation policy or appears to have a solid way of identifying problematic content that isn't like an existing category like gambling or violence. They don't know, for example, how to identify and understand anti-Semitic content. And I found a lot of these companies have just continued to monetize sites like, I won't bring up any particular sites today, but a lot of them are a lot like Breitbart, and they have the same reach and the same sort of flavor as Breitbart, but they continue to be monetized. So I found that there's not one company today that I can say is doing its job right when it comes to vetting its inventory. So no matter where you go on the internet, no matter where you advertise on the internet, you're going to need to be prepared to do a little bit of extra work, because your vendors, the advertising supply chain is not keeping your ads safe. So what I recommend and what we recommend at Check My Ads is for you to check your ads. We simply want you to go in and look at your site placements. If you go and look at that, you will recognize some pretty ugly URLs on there because your vendor is placing those ads there for you. And just that simple act is so powerful, because you can take that and you can highlight those questionable, problematic sites, and then ask your vendor what they're doing. When they promised you that they would take care of your brand, that's what you paid them to do. So all I want people to do, the first step to taking back control, is to check your site placements.
Could I actually, I think just like in addition, I think, right, a lot of the big vendors rely on things like algorithms to be checking site content against it, and they just don't do a very good job. And in fact, yeah. I've found that sites that they block with, things like calling things like sexually explicit are, for instance, trans rights forums, right? And so places where actually a lot of nonprofits should be advertising or should be communicating to the community get blocked if you use their categories, and then the things that they should be blocking don't get blocked. And so definitely, like, it really needs to be an intentional and human-based process.
Yeah, the artificial intelligence, I would say, is pretty stupid. Just yesterday, I was looking at a brand safety company's technology. They released a demo version of how their tech identifies the context of a page, and they had labeled a whole bunch of white nationalist and racist sites as either neutral or even positive. And I found an article about lesbians that was on like Slate magazine as a negative. And that's important, because a lot of these the leaders of these companies and the ad tech industry in general has really pushed the idea that negative sentiment content is not safe for your brand. So they're really making those decisions. First of all, their tech is making those decisions for you. And that means you're not, as you said, you're not appearing in front of the engaged audiences that you need to be connecting with because of those decisions.
And I just build on that and say, like, there's two sides to this. There's the what do you want to defund, and that within that process, I mean, that requires, as Nandini was saying, that requires effort to understand where your ads are going and what you shouldn't be appearing on. but also thinking about like what you do want to fund. So for example, I think it's 73% of LGBTQ content is rendered unmonetizable through the current system. And you've got organizations that are working to try and correct that problem, and kind of take, kind of with contextual ads and make sure that the LGBTQ kind of content is able to monetize itself. We saw, and kind of Nandini, you did a brilliant piece of work around the fact that hard news is being demonetized because kind of brands don't feel squeamish about appearing next to content to do with kind of protests. Well, we need to fund hard journalism, particularly at the moment. We need to ensure that our journalists have the time and resource to be able to speak truth to power. And we need to ensure that diverse communities are able to access media that speaks to them. And there are, thousands of independent publishers out there who are crying out for this kind of monetization and work and support. So, we encourage kind of our members to think about their media spend as like investment in a healthy internet, and the internet that they want, that they would like to see. So it's not just about, it's not just about making sure that the right places get the cash. It's also about making sure that the places that you really wouldn't want to be seen next to don't as well.
And Harriet, something that you've studied quite in depth is really those harms to consumers and citizens from the current advertising model. And another thing that your work has really highlighted is that neither advertisers or consumers actually win out from our current ad model. And sometimes as much as 70% of all ad spend goes to middlemen or just disappears altogether. What can an advertiser, particularly a small nonprofit, like what are we supposed to do about that?
I mean, obviously it's really difficult. And I think if you look at it, depends where you're placing your ads, right? So if you're placing your ads with kind of premium publishers or, kind of big news sites, you're going to lose less. If you're doing it on the open web, you're going to actually lose more of your, more to fraud and more to bad actors. So, I mean, I think essentially, essentially like that doesn't, it's not working for advertisers because their money is being lost to fraud, or it's, their adverts are revenue is disappearing. It's not really working for publishers because they can't monetize themselves properly because, again, they're losing out to middlemen and the platforms. And it's not working for us because we as consumers are kind of either extremely irritated by adverts, or we feel like, it's not a fair value exchange. We're not getting these amazing tailored adverts we think we should be for the amount of data that we're giving away. And I think that's really key to kind of keep in mind. I mean, we recommend, obviously Matt mentioned a few things earlier on, but we recommend things like, kind of actively investing in diverse media. One of our members is called kind of Brand Advance, and they look specifically at this problem. Set Havas have just released some interesting kind of takes on meaningful media, things like that. We also encourage members to explore kind of contextual kind of advertising that might support independent publishers. Kind of things like check your ads so that they know where their advertising is actually going. There's interesting formats out there. There's an organization called Good Loop. It's like an opt-in ad format that donates some of the money for views to charity, all of that stuff. And I think also to have a real think about metrics and about kind of, because our performance metrics that we're measuring success with, I think often kind of allow the system to be gamed. So if we're just investing, in sites in order to hit particular numbers, I think organizations are going to start buying media that will help them hit the numbers, as opposed to media that's actually going to get their adverts in front of the right people or kind of on the right publications. So it's really tricky. There's no one complete solution, but what there is I suppose experimentation and trying things out to see what works for you.
And actually, sorry, John, as one of those people who might be defined as either one of the middlemen or the place where money just disappears to, depending on how you count it. I also think, like, for nonprofits, like, you should push your agency for a couple of things, which is push them for transparency on the numbers and push them for actually your own ownership of your own data. That's two things that honestly are not very common in the industry. And I think honestly, a lot of folks don't even know to ask for it. But, there are unfortunately a lot of ways for people to hide where spend goes and to sort of like blur it, but you should be able to get those kind of breakdowns from the people you're working with.
Yeah, I agree. It's a big red flag if they don't give you access to your own login. You need to have your own login.
Yeah.
And what happens if you're just browsing the web and you see your nonprofit's ad next to some misinformation or on a site that you really disagree with when you're, say, at like a family dinner or something like that? Like, is it as simple as ringing up your agency and telling them to take it down?
It should be. It should be as simple as saying this website needs to be on our exclude list, and hopefully it is. And I'll say what I tell a lot of my clients are like you're not your typical user, so our ads probably follow you around more than anyone else because you visit your own website a lot. You look like a really likely donor. So it may be that your own experience on the internet is not going to necessarily be reflective of, we're spending $100,000 a year on this one website. However, like you said, I think, but it should be something that can get taken care of relatively quickly and relatively easily.
So you had mentioned earlier, Matt, that some of the organizations involved in Stop Hate for Profit, Color of Change being one of them, have made a public statement saying they won't be pausing their own ads on Facebook. And M&R has highlighted a few different options that nonprofits can be considering to stand in solidarity with the campaign. And can you just talk us through some of those? And, like, what do you personally recommend? And that's sort of a question to the panel. What would you recommend to stand in solidarity against Facebook?
Yeah, what we heard from the people we talked to, some of our contacts, was that what they really wanted was to put pressure on Facebook to change, right? And they recognized that for many nonprofits, the relative power that nonprofits have in the world is not necessarily financial; it's more reputational, right? And I personally think that for that reason, not divesting in Facebook, but releasing a press release or a public statement in support of the campaign probably does more than the opposite, right? Quietly pausing ads is not something that's necessarily that Facebook would even notice. I do think that there are other options, right? Like most organizations have Facebook account managers. Those people have very limited ability to impact policy in the short term. But I do think over time, constant communication about advertiser concerns that are consistent across the industry do make their way up the chain. And I think, honestly, even smaller nonprofits have board members who probably have a lot of both financial and political clout, depending on what else they do. Those can be really intimidating avenues to pursue, right? I recognize that. Asking a member of your board to ask his or her company what to back a change is scary. But I will say that when I have seen significant changes at Facebook, it's usually through a combination of both public and back channel pressure. And I think what you can contribute is probably a question that you can answer yourself best.
And Dini, something that you mentioned at the start of nonprofit, at the start of Stop Hate for Profit, which I saw on Twitter, was that you mentioned the real threat to Facebook wasn't this temporary loss in revenue during the boycott period. It's that companies who do a lot of online advertising use that time to find alternative ad models that are really working for them. But Facebook is often the only way that small nonprofits can compete with like big established charities. So do you think they're going to fall behind if the expectation is that people are going to have to find somewhere other than Facebook? Or do you think maybe even is the risk of having ad content appearing alongside some like hate speech or misinformation or just something really objectionable on Facebook that goes against the nonprofit's values? Is that is that risk just too high to take the chance of advertising on Facebook altogether?
Well, my official position on the Facebook ad boycott is and was, you don't have to participate in the boycott, fully in the boycott, to support it and to be a part of it. You can take 10% of your ad spend and experiment and try putting it somewhere else for a month or two, and really expand your idea of what marketing could be. Because what Facebook is and what performance marketing is it's like an ATM. You put your money into the machine and then it spits out impressions and clicks. It does not spit out long-term brand equity. It does not spit out loyalty. It doesn't do any of the things that you need to build a lasting brand that pays off in, over time for your organization or for your business. So the way that we think about marketing today has become so transactional that we don't realize that there's all these other ways for us to build relationships with our customers or with our bases without constantly having to feed that machine. So one of the things that I encouraged my followers and my readers to think about is, have you considered improving your website flow, for example? Have you considered improving your narrative? Do you have a lot, and this isn't just for nonprofits, this is for organizations regardless. A lot of them don't have compelling stories. Have you considered investing that money back into developing a story that you can tell, across all your touch points? Have you considered improving your email list? Or investing in your email list, because email is actually your biggest moneymaker when it comes to fundraising or keeping in touch with your highest engaged clients, customers, donors, whatever. Have you considered, as Harriet said, have you considered going to a media network that focuses on intersectional audiences such as Brand Advance? There are possibilities that go beyond just Facebook and Google. And I think one of the most powerful things you can do actually is to just, again, take 10%. You don't have to take all your money out of Facebook. We know that you have, revenue goals that you need to hit. We know you need to keep in touch with your customers somehow. But that impact of you thinking about other ways to connect with your base is more dangerous to Facebook than this whole, oh yeah, we're going to leave for a month and then we're going to come back.
Totally. And another thing that keeps popping up whenever Facebook is mentioned, especially in the context of nonprofits, is the use, or rather misuse, of consumer data propagated by Facebook. And nonprofits, though, have a bit of a history of doing things that donors or supporters might also have a major ick factor with. For example, like buying direct mail lists with names and addresses off each other and from data brokers, phone numbers, or lots of other personal information that you would think would be relatively protected. So Matt, how is this any different? How is the way that Facebook uses data any different to what's been going on for decades in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, I mean, I will say there probably are some ways that it is different, but I think what keeps coming up, right, is that it's not just a Facebook problem. This is a bad data problem. This is a privacy and community and consumer relationship problem. I thought, one of the reasons you mentioned yourself about that, you said the line was crossed when Facebook had the scandal around third-party data integration with Cambridge Analytica, right? One of the things that was really interesting to me about the outcome of that was that Facebook actually did make a change to how it incorporated outside data to Facebook to inform advertising models. And I will say, I usually roll my eyes at Facebook saying that it solves something, but I will say that based on the data that we have for across clients, when Facebook made that move to exclude demographic, psychographic data from third parties, it actually vastly improved the performance of their targeting options like interest audiences. And I say this to point out that I think that there's this idea in advertising that the data that consumers find most distasteful is what works best, right? Like there's this assumption that if you can dig through someone's drawers, you can use that to find some secret formula to predict their behavior. But when in actuality, the best way to predict if someone is interested in donating to you is what they volunteered to you themselves, like purposefully and openly. So more transparent, more communicative digital data is not just ethically better, but the numbers point to it being better for performance as well if we're on the same page. And I think that for example, with GDPR, a lot of email lists got pared down by large numbers, but what you're left with are people who want to be on your email list. And long term, that's probably going to improve performance, not actually harm it.
Yeah, and imagine if you call your list to the folks that really care, and then you give them a story or a narrative in your weekly amazing emails that people open that consistently get higher open rates and click rates. I mean, that's more than anything money can buy.
Absolutely, yeah. We see the power of story from again and again, and nonprofits and all effective fundraising mobilization has a really strong story at its heart. So that's really true. And Harriet, one thing that Matt mentioned there was the GDPR, but right now the European Union is considering other legislation like the Digital Services Act and a few other things that could have some global consequences on the way that online ads work altogether, not just on Facebook. Is this the type of thing that nonprofits should be thinking about now to get ahead of the curve? Yeah,
absolutely. Because I think, a lot of this is a movable feast, and the European Union are considering lots of different options in this space. I think, kind of what we should be thinking of is how we respect users as, in ways which kind of the panel have just described, thinking about ways which, kind of we can actually stay ahead of legislation, show that we're doing good, kind of show that we're doing good and well, so that we're not, kind of essentially legislators don't feel compelled to take the toys away. I think that's really, really important. And I think that what we're, I know that, kind of things are very different in the States, very different elsewhere, but, if you are caught kind of abusing users' data in ways that feel uncomfortable, then you are definitely damaging your brand and losing trust. And that, we've talked a lot about how if ad spend works against your intentions and works against your brand, it doesn't help you to create and maintain these long-lasting relationships, which are going to make kind of people continue to donate with you, continue to engage with you. So in my mind, legislation really should only be about kind of clearing up the worst stuff. We as an industry, as organizations, should really, really be thinking about how we can lead and exemplify, kind of good, kind of good leadership. That's something that the Conscious Advertising Network's all about. Kind of we see not only, kind of legislation being flouted, but we also see areas where there's not enough guidance on, perhaps there's a gap in legislation, which is causing issues which either impact on society or impact on individuals. And we've created these manifestos that, kind of help the industry understand, hate speech, help the industry understand how to tackle misinformation, how to, how you go beyond GDPR compliance to, kind of to think about informed consent, kind of more holistically than a lot of organisations do. And, all of that is designed to keep the industry ahead of legislation, so that we can do things better than we absolutely have to. Because let's be honest, compliance is not, in a lot of cases, is not going to add to our brand, build our brand, and kind of make us wonderful in the eyes of our donors, in our kind of supporters, etc.
Exactly. I guess it's coming back to that point about focusing on the right things, like telling a strong story and doing those things really well. Is important. Compliance is obviously like very important, but just doing best practice straight away. And I guess on that note, are there any nonprofits that you know of that are doing this well?
Ooh, good question.
This is panel as well.
I think WWF are doing fantastic things with their digital work. I think they tell a strong story. I think they use the platform, kind of their techniques really masterfully. And I feel I feel like they're doing fantastic things.
And I know that one of the questions is what should other nonprofits do? And I think working with WWF, one of the things that they do well is they sort of set the ground rules for themselves about what they're willing to accept and what they're willing to not accept ahead of time, right? So they're not being reactive, they're being proactive. And I think what's very clear is that the ethical math is difficult, right? And it's not going to be the same for everybody. And trying to decide if like getting one extra donation that could lead to someone being fed is worth being on a platform or not, like that takes a lot of work and effort to figure out how, where the lines are drawn. But you really have to do it ahead of time, because if you only start to think about it when it pops up in the news and you've got a week to decide, it's probably not going to be done well.
That's true. Another thing that we know for sure is that social media companies effectively run on outrage to keep users engaged. And in the digital rights space and digital ads, we kind of call it the intention economy. So practically that means that reasonable viewpoints are overlooked by algorithms and more extreme viewpoints are rewarded by the algorithm, and the platforms actively amplify those posts. It's sort of why we're encouraged not to engage necessarily with that more extreme content that we see. But one thing that people on this panel have mentioned earlier was nonprofits being a bit more bold about the statements that they're making in support of things like Stop Hate for Profit or Black Lives Matter. So does that mean that nonprofits should start being more outspoken and bold, maybe to like either game the system or even just be noticed in a way on social platforms where they might not have actually had that attention from the algorithm?
I feel like I can speak to this from the perspective of starting a campaign that literally came out of nowhere. Really, Sleeping Giants was just a Twitter account that started by alerting advertisers of their ad placements on Breitbart, right? Like, it was incredible for me to watch the work that we were doing. I mean, it was a good story though, we were an anonymous account. Whoever's running this account is just stirring up a lot of trouble, and the stories started to write themselves, and we got a lot of media attention over the years. And I cannot overstate, there was no money involved in this campaign at any point. I think if we did want to go the nonprofit route, we probably could have gotten some cash and funding out of it. But I mean, I think that's the kind of coverage people kill for, right? Like, that's the kind of coverage we all want. And that really purely came from a place of just having a strong voice and having something to say. Certainly boldness did help us. Certainly our ability to communicate helped us. That's why I'm always advocating for hiring the best copywriters you can find, hiring the best marketers and communicators you can find, because that is the work of nonprofits. We have to get our message out there in an effective way. And if you're not investing in those basic things, if people don't understand what you do or what the value is, or if they're not seeing results, then why are we here? So yeah, investing in the story is the most important thing that you can do. I think you can do it without a single penny. And the money that we earn on top of that, and the funding that we get on top of that is the cherry on top.
Cool.
I think there's also when we look at how people behave on social platforms, and like we break it down by issues or kind of political leanings or, you know, things like that, there's also ways, I think there's loads of scope for nonprofits to get bolder, and I think there's loads of scope for them to use paid media more creatively, actually, to you know, to actually engage with different conversations and often break through you know, kind of filter echo chambers and filter bubbles, right? So, you know, if you're when we look at climate change kind of conversations online, they're happening between the same people. And the anti-climate change stuff is happening over here. Well, what happens if you were going to advertise on the, you know, on the climate denial or climate delay stuff, and try and kind of bring people over to your kind of point of view? We know conspiracy theorists behave like bots online. They post an awful lot of stuff. And they're telling like, you know, to come back to Nandini's point, they're telling a fantastic story, and they're layering that story, and they're reacting to what happens. And actually, it's, you know, it's a masterful kind of narrative development. But we know that, you know, if nonprofits and organizations kind of got stuck into those conversations and engaged a lot more, I think we would see, you know, we would see a lot, you know, some people engaging with the other side and, you know, creating a more nuanced debate. So I think there's loads of opportunity there to get bolder and to think about how, you know, kind of paid media and earned media can help you do that.
Yeah, and just one more example I just want to bring up, because you're talking about climate change. Look at what Greta managed to do in 1 year, and she didn't need a penny to do any of it. So it's just, we can see the effect that just the investment in story can have on your business. And yeah, look at the way that the other side, so to speak, anti-climate change denial and propaganda efforts, I mean, they are, in a sense, I don't want to say they're doing it right, but they're onto something, right? Because people need something to grab onto. They need to see movement in a story. They need to see progression. And that's what some of these narratives offer, especially conspiracy theories. That's why they're so attractive to people. We need to study those tactics and use it for our causes in a progressive way.
For sure. And I guess to sort of think about like what are some of the couple of things that nonprofits should really be considering when they're looking at like digital ads or even just using online social platforms? And this is for the whole panel. Matt,
I think I would just say, like, figure out where your lines are and make sure that you have the opportunity to put in the work to make sure that who you hire is not crossing those lines. And I think, right, that might mean choosing not to work with certain platforms. It might mean pushing those platforms to adjust how they operate. It might mean making sure that you are taking advantage of the technology that exists in order to accomplish what you want. It might mean divesting of the technology that exists. And unfortunately, I think that it's complex. It's going to take that work. And I think if you let the industry decide for you how your ad dollars get spent, it's probably not going to be along the lines that you find to be lining up with your ethics.
And to help you with those red lines, like at CAN, we've got a load of open source resources that look at things from children's welfare to hate speech to misinformation, allow you to audit like your basically you kind of like yourself and your vendors and where stuff is going, and to kind of make and kind of hopefully help kind of guide some of those decisions. So we've got a guide to what hate speech looks like to help some organizations. We've got we signpost to initiatives or other things that help organizations to tackle some of that stuff. So I would say just like sit down for half a day and kind of use the open source materials to kind of audit your ad spend, and then work out what you can do to kind of fund the stuff you want to fund, defund the stuff you don't want to fund, and kind of work out whether your vendors are going to help you do that or whether you need to find some new ones.
Yeah, and just to echo what Matt and Harriet said, figure out where your lines are. On a practical level, you can develop a brand policy a set of brand policy guidelines where you essentially operationalize your brand values and tell your agency, these are our red lines. We do not want to appear on this type of content. We do want to appear on this type of content. And you can hand that over to your agency, and it's something that you can use as well internally to make some of your decisions around what kind of partners you want to take on, what kind of, say, influencers you want to work with, and where your line is on any kind of partnership moving forward in the future.
That's great. Well, that feels like a really good place to stop. And so I just want to thank the three of you, Harriet, Matt, and Nandini. This has been super insightful, even for me, when I do this kind of stuff every day. And I know you're all busy people, and I just want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.